A week after our divorce, my ex-husband married his perfect mistress. But when I saw her at the altar, I couldn't believe it because she was an exact younger replica of me, right down to the specific crooked scar on my left eyebrow. My breath caught in my throat as I stood in the back of the chapel, watching Gregory slide a diamond ring onto her finger, completely erasing our 10-year history with a carbon copy. People tell you to walk away and find peace after a breakup, but is it really moving on if the person who hurt you refuses to let you exist? I had to decide right there if I was going to be the bigger person and leave, or if I was going to turn his dream wedding into his worst nightmare. Is true justice found in forgiveness or in making them feel the same emptiness they gave you? As they turned to face the crowd, she glanced at me. She didn't look confused. She looked terrified. She wasn't just a mistress. She was wearing the exact same designer necklace I had bought with my first paycheck, a piece I had left in the house because I couldn't bear to keep it. The way she reached up to touch the clasp revealed a nervous habit that was purely mine, a tell he had forced her to adopt through sheer psychological pressure. Gregory caught my eye, and instead of looking ashamed, he winked. He wasn't just replacing me, he was performing a psychological experiment to see if I would crumble or fight back. He wanted a reaction, but he didn't realize that I had already hacked his bank account months ago. I watched his face as he scanned the room, looking for his perfect prize, unaware that the real prize, my silence, was about to end. I remember the first time I met Gregory. It was at a rainy bus stop in downtown Chicago. He had offered me his umbrella, a small act of kindness that paved the way for 10 years of what I thought was genuine love. We built a life together, the house in the suburbs, the career, the stability. But underneath, he was a man who needed to curate his world. If I changed my hair, he felt slighted. If I pursued my own career goals, he felt threatened. He wasn't looking for a wife, he was looking for a mirror. And when I finally dared to shatter that mirror by asking for a divorce, he didn't try to fix it, he simply sought out a newer, more malleable version. The way he held her, his hand pressed firmly against the small of her back, was a possessive gesture I knew all too well. It was a brand. It meant, you are mine, and you will behave as I expect. But as I watched the ceremony progress, I noticed the cracks. The girl, whose name I later learned was Clara, was glancing toward the exit every few seconds. She wasn't glowing, she was sweating. She wasn't an accessory, she was a captive in a costume. My heart, which had been hardened by the bitterness of the last year, softened just a fraction. I realized this wasn't just about me, it was about stopping the machine that he had built to destroy women's souls. I spent the next hour documenting every detail of the wedding, not to cherish the memory, but to catalog the lies. I saw his mother whispering to an aunt, looking at Clara with open distaste. I saw his business partners drinking champagne and laughing, oblivious to the fact that the company was hemorrhaging money. The entire event was a facade, a paper-thin veil draped over a rotting foundation. I had the keys to the kingdom, and tonight I was going to change the locks. Every smile he forced upon the crowd was a lie, and every cheer from the audience was for a life that didn't exist. He had turned his life into a stage production, but he forgot to hire a lead actress who actually wanted to perform. I stood up to leave, but as I reached the door, the bride's phone buzzed loudly in her bouquet. It wasn't a wedding notification, it was a message from my own burner phone, and I watched from the shadows as she turned pale, her hands beginning to shake uncontrollably. She looked at Gregory, and for a split second, I saw pure, unadulterated hatred in her eyes. It was time. Is she playing him, or is she actually my ally in this? If you think there's a secret alliance here, smash that like button. Drop a comment with your theory on who she really is, and make sure to subscribe and share this video. The next part will change everything you think you know. I ducked into the garden to avoid being seen, but I bumped into his sister, Sarah, who looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. She shoved a thick, heavy manila file into my hands. She whispered that Gregory hadn't just married a girl, he had married the daughter of the man who ruined his father's business, and he didn't even know it yet. He was playing a game of chess without realizing his opponent had moved the board. I opened the file under the dim light of a street lamp. My heart stopped. There were photos of Gregory meeting with a private investigator 6 months before our divorce. He had been planning this entire replacement long before I even suspected he was cheating. He had been studying my history, my background, even my medical records to find someone who could physically mimic me. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a targeted campaign to replace my existence. The depth of the deception made me physically ill. Every romantic weekend we took, every late night conversation, every quiet moment of connection, he had been running a background simulation of how to replace me. He had even hired consultants to curate the ideal wife based on my psychological profile. My blood ran cold as I read the notes. They had categorized me as compliant yet intellectual, must find replacement with lower ambition. He wanted a version of me that couldn't challenge him. I thought back to the nights I spent in our marital home feeling inadequate because he was always working or distant. I thought I was the one failing the relationship. I had spent hours in therapy deconstructing my flaws to be a better partner for him. Meanwhile, he was scouting for my successor. The sheer cold-bloodedness of it felt like a violation. I looked at the photos of Clara again. She was younger, yes, but she also had a spark in her eyes that he would eventually try to extinguish. I couldn't let him do it. Not again. I had to ensure that his house of cards didn't just fall, it had to be incinerated. I began to realize that Gregory's greatest weakness was his own ego. He assumed everyone else was as shallow and transactional as he was. He never once considered that someone might actually possess a moral compass or the courage to use it. I spent the next 2 days obsessively cross-referencing his financial records with the information in Sarah's file. It was all there: the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the illicit business dealings. He had been so focused on creating the perfect public image that he completely neglected the trail of breadcrumbs he was leaving behind in his digital life. It was a gold mine of evidence, and I knew exactly how to use it. I wasn't going to call the police, not yet. I wanted him to see his own empire crumble, brick by brick, while he was still standing in the middle of it. The wedding music stopped abruptly. The bride, Clara, ran out of the chapel, sobbing. She didn't look like a woman celebrating a union. She looked like a prisoner who had just seen a potential escape. She saw me standing there with the file. She stopped, gasping for air. She wasn't my enemy. She was a victim who had been trapped by Gregory's debt manipulation tactics. He had used her family's financial vulnerability to force her into this. I handed her the keys to my car, parked just beyond the hedge. I told her to drive until she hit the state line, but as she scrambled into the driver's seat, Gregory burst out of the chapel doors. He was holding his phone up, recording, and he began screaming that I was stealing his wife and that I was mentally unstable. He knew exactly how to make me look like the villain to anyone watching, and his eyes were manic with the thrill of the confrontation. How would you escape a trap like this? If you think I should turn myself in or keep running, tell me in the comments. Please like this video to support the channel, subscribe for part 3, and share this with your friends who love a good revenge plot. I stayed calm. I pulled out my phone and held it up. Gregory stopped mid-rant, his face shifting from rage to confusion. I played the audio of his business deals that I had recorded weeks ago.
Conversations where he admitted to tax evasion and corporate espionage. The sound echoed in the quiet garden. Gregory went silent, his face turning ash-gray color. He realized I hadn't just watched him, I had documented every single illegal tax loophole he had used to buy that house. He tried to grab my phone, but his movements were sluggish, fueled by panic. He was no longer the man in control. He was a man holding on to a sinking ship, trying to blame the ocean for his own lack of navigation. For years, he had operated under the assumption that I was a passive observer of his life. He saw me as the woman who made the tea, who organized the schedule, who ensured the house was tidy. He never considered that I was the one who balanced the books, the one who negotiated the insurance premiums, the one who navigated the complex web of his professional obligations. While he was out playing the big shot, I was the one managing the reality. I watched him scramble, his suit jacket rumpled, his hair disheveled. The mask had slipped, and underneath was a small, frightened man who was terrified of losing the prestige he had bought with other people's money. It was almost pathetic. I felt no joy in seeing him crumble, but there was an immense sense of relief in knowing that the power dynamic had finally, permanently shifted. He was no longer the architect of my life, he was a footnote in the story I was currently writing. I realized that my own strength hadn't come from his validation, but from my ability to survive his devaluation. Every challenge he had placed in my path had only served to sharpen my resolve and refine my skills. I recalled the thousands of hours I had spent working on his projects, fixing his errors, and keeping his secrets. He thought I was just doing my duty as a wife, but in reality, I was an apprentice to his own craft of deception. I had learned his tactics, analyzed his weaknesses, and cataloged his patterns. And now I was using that very knowledge to dismantle his life. It was a cruel lesson, but one I had learned well. He had spent 10 years training his own undoing. Suddenly, a black SUV roared up the driveway, blocking his escape. His own business partners stepped out, wearing sharp suits and colder expressions. They weren't here to celebrate the wedding. They were here to collect the massive debt he had incurred to fund his lavish lifestyle and his project to replace me. He was caught between his past mistakes and his current lies. He looked at me, pleading, but I just watched him, my voice tight. The irony was suffocating. He had spent his life thinking he was the smartest person in any room. He had manipulated his way through his career, his family, and his marriage. But he fundamentally underestimated the power of the people he walked over. He thought I was weak because I chose kindness. He thought Clara was desperate because she was young. He didn't understand that desperation is a powerful fuel for change. I watched as his business partners cornered him, their voices low and dangerous. They weren't interested in his excuses. They weren't interested in his wedding. They were interested in the money that had vanished into his vanity projects. He looked at me, hoping I would intervene, but I turned my back. My job here was done. The mechanism of his destruction had already been set in motion, and it no longer required my presence. One of the partners walked up to me and handed me a document. It was a transfer of ownership for the house he had fought so hard to keep in the divorce. "You're free, Miss Miller," the partner said, "and as for Mr. Gregory, his contract has been terminated." Gregory's face went hollow, but then he pulled a small silver object from his pocket, a hidden key to a secondary, secret bank account he had been hiding from everyone. Did I go too far, or is this what he deserved? If you are on my side, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this story. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Does justice always require a little bit of darkness?
I didn't answer the partner. I just walked away, leaving Gregory to face the consequences of a life built on pure deception.
I didn't want his money or his apology. I wanted him to lose the control he valued more than anything else. He looked at his partners, realizing the secret account was gone. I had moved those funds to a charity in his name 2 days ago. He was truly bankrupt, not just of money, but of the social capital he had spent a decade hoarding. 6 months later, the world had moved on. I heard through the grapevine that Gregory was living in a small studio apartment, working a job he hated, far from the estate he used to flaunt. His perfect life had completely dissolved. He was no longer the golden boy. He was just another man with a history of bitterness and failed schemes. He tried to play the lead in a tragedy he wrote himself, but he ended up being the only one sitting in the empty theater when the lights went out. The bride, Clara, reached out to me. She was miles away, living a quiet, happy life. She sent me a photo of herself. She had dyed her hair, cut it short, and changed everything about her style. She had finally broken the cycle he tried to trap us in. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Seeing her growth reminded me that we were never actually the models he saw us as. We were the artists waiting for the right moment to paint our own futures. I spent the afternoon at a local coffee shop watching the rain hit the window. For the first time in years, my heart didn't race when I heard a car door slam. I wasn't waiting for a text or a demand. I was just existing. The silence of the afternoon felt like a luxury. Gregory had tried to build a life on the foundation of my identity, but he forgot that an identity isn't something you steal, it's something you earn through your own struggles. I took a sip of my coffee and looked at the notebook in front of me. It was filled with my own plans, my own dreams, and my own goals. There was no mention of Gregory, no mention of his expectations, no mention of the life I had left behind. I had reclaimed my name, my reputation, and most importantly, my future. The trauma would always be a part of my story, but it was no longer the protagonist. I was. I had traveled through the fire of his betrayal and emerged on the other side, not as a victim, but as a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I realized that he had been so busy trying to erase me that he had effectively erased himself. Without the mirror of my compliance, he was lost. He didn't know who he was, and he had no idea how to become anyone else. It was a tragic end for a man who spent his whole life trying to be everyone's version of perfect. As for me, I was perfectly happy being exactly who I was, flawed, resilient, and finally free. I walked back to my car, feeling the crisp air on my skin. I passed by the old neighborhood where we used to live, but I didn't feel a flicker of nostalgia. The house looked smaller, less significant, like a stage set after the play has ended. I thought about the thousands of hours I wasted trying to appease a man who viewed human beings as disposable assets. I had spent so much energy keeping his fragile ego intact, polishing his image and shielding his reputation, while my own ambitions slowly withered in the dark. But that time wasn't wasted. It was the crucible that forged my current independence. I understood now that his greatest gift to me wasn't the life we shared, but the moment I walked away and realized I had everything I needed within myself. I didn't need his validation, his money, or his permission to succeed. I was the architect of my own path, and for the first time, the foundation was built on truth rather than someone else's fragile, self-serving lies. The road ahead looked clear, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking in the rearview mirror. I realized then that the biggest revenge wasn't watching him fail, it was realizing I never needed him to define who I was in the first place. But then, I found a letter he had left in my old mailbox claiming he had already started a new life and he was coming for the one thing I had left, my career.